What a lovely audience. Thank you for all coming. We sure appreciate it. So tonight's program commemorates and celebrates both Women's History Month and the 150th anniversary of Gail Borden Library. Our presenter, Linda Rock, a gifted storyteller and a historian, is going to share the stories and introduce us to 4 interesting women from Elgin's past. Some of you may have seen Jerry Turnquist's program a little recently, and Jerry talked about the history of Elgin and the library, focus on his story, and Linda will share her story as she shares the stories from the perspective of these 4 women. And we also have 2 very special guests in the audience that we'll introduce you to at the end of the program. So without further ado, let's give a warm library welcome for Linda.
So many friends, thank you for coming, I appreciate that. You know, what better way to celebrate Women's History Month than to celebrate Elgin women? And my goodness, there are so many of them, but I knew I couldn't keep you here all evening, so I narrowed it down to 4, but we could do this program probably every month and never end with notable Elgin women. The women that I picked this evening, they're all real, of course, and they're all are buried in Bluff City Cemetery. The characters, the information I researched or was given to me came from the Elgin Cemetery walk, and the stories were just so unique and so interesting. I felt we needed to continue to tell their story. So you see who we're going to meet this evening. Some of the names you may recognize, some you may not, but by the end of the evening I think you'll realize each woman is a woman of substance and a woman who has a story definitely worth telling. I am going to change clothing in front of you. I promise not to embarrass you and not to embarrass myself. But I will change a few items just as I morph into a new Elgin woman. I found these words of wisdom years ago. Can you hear me fine? Okay, good. That's the teacher in me. I want to make sure you can hear. I found these words of wisdom, and I think they're very appropriate for this evening. The words are: be amusing, never tell unkind stories, and above all, never tell long ones. And so I began. Good evening, everyone. Thank you for coming this evening to hear my story. My name is Laura Raymond Gifford, and it is my pleasure to speak to you this evening about my recollections of early Elgin. But a little about myself first. I was not born here. Of course, I was born in and grew up in Sherborne, New York on November 26, 1800. Wow. It was there that I met my husband, James Talcott Gifford. We were married on his birthday there, January 1st, 1823. Now, it has been said that I possessed a certain feminine daintiness and charm, and indeed, I did enjoy fine clothing and fine things, and did my very best to provide a comfortable home for my family, which indeed was not easy. We moved so many times. And as you probably know, when you move, there is limited space and limited weight, which made it quite a challenge. And as our family grew, it became even more of a challenge. But in addition to this daintiness, I also possessed a determination and a stamina that was very important for survival of pioneers. I relied heavily on our Heavenly Father to see me and my family through the hardships that we would endure. Now, James was a man of great vision who had hopes of founding a town. He left us, my children and me, and left with his brother Hezekiah, traveling this direction to look for a good location, a good site for a town. Hezekiah and James went by wagon, covered wagon. They went with a wagon train traveling this direction and stopped in Chicago. At that point, the town was approximately 3,000. That's the population. James and Hezekiah then, they left their wagon and traveled by horseback. They followed an old Indian trail to the Milwaukee River and went along the Milwaukee River searching for a good water power site, because you know that is extremely important to have water near a town. Well, all the good sites were taken along the Milwaukee River. They left their horses and then they traveled by foot to the Fox River and went south on the Fox River until they arrived into the area where we are today. On April 3rd, 1835, James staked his claim, naming this location Elgin. Now, he named it after a favorite Scottish hymn, which actually is Elgin. I'm not sure how the change occurred in pronunciation, but that was how we got the name for this lovely town. Now, this was a good site for him to have a new town, because he knew it was a crossing point between Chicago, which was a thriving town, and becoming a thriving town, and the lead mining town of Galena. So he knew this would be an excellent location for businesses, for those traveling from one location to the other. Well, James then came back for me and for the children so that we could join him in our new home. Now, women especially, and mothers in particular, listen to the ages of our 5 children as I tell you who we took from New York to this new town. Our children were ages 8, 6, 4, 2.5, and not quite 1. Those were our 5 children. Those packing skills that I said were so important were extremely important to take all of our family to this new location. We did not travel by wagon train, we traveled by boat. We first traveled on an old, slow canal boat, went ever so slowly, and then were transferred to a riverboat, which was quite crowded with other families who were also traveling in this direction. Now, we arrived in Chicago, where Hezekiah met us, and to take us to our new home. Little Sarah was taken off the wagon and placed on the ground, and as a small one, her legs wobbled and she fell on her bottom. She was declared Elgin's first settler. Well, our first home was a log cabin. James and Hezekiah had worked on that cabin before we arrived. It was a 1-room log cabin. Our 5 children, James and I, and Harriet and Experience, James' 2 sisters, also came with us on this trip. So it was rather cozy, to put it politely. It not only served as our home, however, it was also was the church. Harriet was a teacher. She had held classes there. When mail delivery started, it was the post office, it was the courthouse. So it was a very, very busy place with very little time for privacy, as you can imagine. Well, in 1839, then, our second home was built, larger one, not quite so crowded. Life was becoming a little easier. We were very pleased in 1841 with the arrival of our youngest child, Newton Dexter. our first Elginite from the Gifford family. People were arriving from the east. My family, James's family, and the Kimballs were arriving at the same time, and they were establishing homes and businesses on the west side of town. So Elgin grew rather quickly in a relatively short time. Well, James, as restless as he was, in 1845 was anxious to start another town. He wanted to go into Wisconsin near Grafton and begin another town. Well, I had the 6 children. I stayed in Elgin with my family, and he went on his own, but we did communicate through letters. He urged me to come with and bring the children to join him. He even began building a home for us there. Well, I acquiesced. I did take the children up into Grafton, and we lived there for a few years, but it's when tragedy struck. Our Sarah, or Lucy, I'm sorry, Lucy, Sarah was still around. Lucy, who was 16 years old, and our baby, Newton Dexter, both developed fever and died while we were in Wisconsin. I encouraged, pleaded with James, said we need to go back to Elgin to stay where our family and friends are and where we had better health care, medical care, and he did agree. And we did move back to Elgin in 1850. Now, back home for me in Elgin, James built the home of his dreams, the stone cottage. It was cobblestone with a mansard roof, beautiful home. It reminded him so much of the East. It was a lovely home and much bigger than our log cabin, I must say, much more pleasant. Unfortunately, James did not live long to enjoy it. He died in August of 1850, so he was only in the cobblestone for a few years. I lived to the ripe age of 72. I lived until 1872 and remained in Elgin and buried in Bluff City Cemetery. I am so proud of my husband for all he accomplished. I'm so proud of my children who remained in town and became prominent, responsible citizens. And I'm so proud of this town. As I look, I see how much it's grown, how diverse it's become. I understand you even have your own riverboat, and I'm wondering how many people arrive on that riverboat. Well, I could continue, but I must stop so that you can meet some other wonderful women from Elgin. So thank you so much for your kind attention. You don't have to close your eyes. This is my partner. Well, thank you for allowing me to join Mrs. Gifford. It is a pleasure and an honor to be in the same company of such highly esteemed women. My name is Mary Carpenter Lord. Perhaps you recognize the name, perhaps not. I was born in 1832, making myself younger than I really am. 1832 to Alfred and Lucinda Bosworth Edwards. Now my first husband was Julius Carpenter. Julius was of the founding family of Carpentersville. Yes, indeed. He owned and operated the Illinois Iron and Bolt Company in Dundee. Was a very successful businessman. We were married in 1852 and were blessed with 3 children. unfortunately, all three died at a young age, before Julius or I died. After marriage, Julius worked very hard. He always was a hard worker and a very successful businessman. He did die in 1880 and left me a fortune. In 1889, actually, it was stated that I was probably the wealthiest woman in the county. Well, it was wonderful to be financially secure. However, you can imagine how lonely I was. My 3 children were gone. My husband was gone. But I was fortunate to meet another wonderful man, and his name was George P. Lord. Now, George was 70 years old, and I was 57 when we married. Needless to say, we had no children. We both were financially wealthy. George was also a wonderful, successful businessman. He was in real estate. He invested in stocks and bonds, which were successful. He was actually mayor of Elgin at one time. He was president of the First National Bank. He dabbled in lots of businesses and was quite good at it. So we both came to our marriage very comfortably, financially set. We loved to travel, and of course had the opportunity to do that. We loved to travel to Europe. Now we did believe that the wealth we had was meant to be shared. We felt that was very important, and we donated quite a bit to the city of Elgin. We donated to the YWCA, the YMCA, Elgin Academy, Sherman Hospital, the Old People's Home, as well as other institutions. My favorite donation, I must say, was to Lord's Park. Now, as I said, George and I loved to travel in Europe, and we did visit many parks. Now, there was a 50-acre piece of property on this side of town that was made available for sale in 1889 for $10,000, which was evidently a bargain at the time. It was offered to the city, but the referendum failed. It did not pass, so the city did not purchase the property. In 1892 then, George and I purchased the property for $16,000 and donated to the city so that it would be a public resting place. It was a wonderful place. It was Willow Creek Woods, so there was a creek. The creek was dammed up. 2 lagoons were dug. Animals were brought in, deer, peacocks, even a caged bear, and later a lion. And I understand there were other animals also in that zoo. There was an electrically lit bandstand for concerts. There was a pavilion that was built. And in 1905, there was actually a public museum, a history museum structure that was built also. That was built in my memory. That was after my death. It was a wonderful place, and I wonder why people often said to us, why would you spend that amount of money on something so trivial as a park? Well, George addressed that question at the dedication of the pavilion in 1898, and I'd like to read, it's a very short portion, but I think this explains or answers that question, why we would make such an investment. He said, "City life is a constant strain upon the nervous system, impairing its force and injuring the health of the people. The park is designed for a public resting place, a place to which the people may resort for pleasure, rest, and recreation. From this standpoint, Who can estimate its value or have a just conception of the beauties that may be derived from frequent and prolonged visits to its cool and refreshing retreats? And do you not agree? It's so wonderful to have a concert on a Sunday afternoon and families and couples walking through the park. There were beautiful parkways and families picnicking. It's just a wonderful place to be. And I am so pleased that we chose to make that donation. As I said, I died in 1905. George, as healthy as he was, outlived me by a year and died in 1906. Now, Lord's Park, I understand, is still quite charming and quite useful. I'm guessing that you may also exhibit some stress in your lives at some point or another, and you may need a resting place. Well, I strongly encourage you to make the visit to Lord's Park and enjoy your time there. There's also a zoo in the summer, I understand, a farm zoo, Teft Farm Zoo. Part of the property belonged to Mr. Teft, Mayor Teft. So you might want to come and visit that zoo at some time too in the summer hours. Well, thank you for your attention. I would encourage you to come to the park, but I'm going to stop encouraging you so that you can meet another quite interesting lady who had quite an adventure. Her story is quite different from my story, but I hope you enjoy it. Thank you. An Elgin watch, an 1892 Elgin watch. And you're welcome, after I pull it out, to take a look at it. It's a beautiful watch.
You gonna leave the same hat on?
No. Okay. Yeah. Put on a different hat.
She must have a whole room.
This woman was the first person I portrayed at the cemetery walk. I think it was I don't know what year it was a long time ago. And she is so interesting. I think she's probably, I shouldn't play favorites, but I think she's probably my favorite because she's so unique. Oh, I forgot to put on my goggles. I'll just show them to you. I don't think I need them in here. It's not too dusty or too. Well, hello everyone. How nice to see all of you. My name is Alice Byrd Potter. My friends call me Birdie, so you may call me Birdie. I was born in 1872 to Charles and Elvira Mann Potter. Now my father was a prominent man in town. He was at the turn of the century the president of the Elgin Board of Trade. So our family was quite comfortable and we were a prominent family. One of my relatives, I'm a direct descendant of the founder of Rhode Island, Roger Williams. And I really believe that is the bloodline that gave me the adventuresome spirit that I have. I married in 1895. I married John Texner. John and I shared a love for music and a talent for it also. John was a fine violinist. He also taught violin. And he operated a piano and organ store in town. He also directed the Elgin Military Band at one time. So he was quite talented. But I was talented also. I enjoyed music. I taught mandolin, banjo, piano, music, and dance. And also composed some songs which I think are quite good. Perhaps you've heard of them. Have you seen any music? Alice Potter. Just look for them because I think the songs are quite good. Now, unfortunately, our common interest in music was not enough to keep our marriage secure. John and I, to 8 days to the year of our wedding, John moved out. We had lived all that time in my family's home, and perhaps was part of the issue, I'm not sure. That might have been, but he did move out eight years to the day of our wedding. And 4 years later, I was granted a divorce on the grounds of desertion. I went to court and I took back my maiden name. Now, it was an amicable divorce, I must say. I have nothing to say about John that would be negative. He was a wonderful man, but we just didn't make a very good couple. Well, you may ask, if I'm a musician, why am I dressed in this attire? In the 1900s, cross-country car runs became quite popular, automobile runs. And I was one that became enamored with automobiles. In fact, I received 2 awards. One in 1907, and I have to make sure I get this correct, I was the champion lady driver of the West. This was in 1907. Now I have to tell you the story. Actually, there were 3 women. It was a race, and there were 3 women who were vying for this title. The two of the women left the race, refused to race because of the bad road conditions. So I did become the champion by default. But I'll still hold that title. In 1908 then, I became somewhat of a celebrity because I drove in a cross-country run, and it was not a race, but a run from Chicago to New York. Now, I was unattended by a male chaperone, and as you can see, that did not bother me. There were 3 women friends that went with me. I drove a Haynes automobile, beautiful car. The Haynes Automobile Company said that this trip was the best performance that the car had ever made. During that close to 2,000 miles, not one adjustment needed to be made on the engine. No screw or nut or bolt needed to be tightened. It was a beautiful performance. We did have one unscheduled stop on the way, and that was when a nail penetrated the tire. But I was able to fix it, and we moved on. I do recommend Diamond tires, in case you're wondering. Well, we had a wonderful time. Newspapers wrote up accounts of our trip. We stopped along the way. On the way back, a group of Haynes automobile owners in Hobart, Indiana held a banquet for us. There were 40 people, and that was a wonderful, wonderful time. We arrived, the trip coming back was rather good. We did hit some problems in Erie. When we were in Erie, there was some bad weather. This was in July. And the roads, of course, were not paved. So it was, and there were some storms. So it was a difficult trip for a portion of the time. But then the rest of the trip was wonderful. Now, from Chicago then to Elgin, the trip took approximately 2 hours. But I understand that's very similar to something you call rush hour, is it not? So it may not have been all that long. We enjoyed that time so much, and I was so pleased to be able to share that time with my girlfriends. Back home, back in Elgin, I continued to give lessons, music lessons. I did back the efforts of the road races. Of course, I couldn't drive. I was a woman. I couldn't drive the races. I also was one of the founders of the Elgin Humane Society and fought hard to work against the allowing of dissection of living animals for research. And I worked very hard on making sure that there would be a law to prevent that. Well, I became a celebrity somewhat again in 1912. I love attention, as you might tell. In 1912, I noticed in the newspaper that there was a job needed, a job open in Chicago for a car salesman. I went to Chicago, went to the dealership, and of course when he saw that I was a man, the owner was not so sure, but he said, well, I'll give you 1 week. See how you do. And I sold 3 cars in 1 week and became the first full-time female car salesperson in the state of Illinois. Now, I teach a lot of children music, piano, and lessons, and I often give them advice whether they want it or not. And the main advice I give to them, and I will give to you, is, as you look at my life, don't be afraid to take chances. If you have a dream, be sure you work on following up on that dream and achieving that dream. But along the way, don't forget to give to others. That's a very important part of life. Thank you very much.
Looks like you're gonna do housework.
Does it look like I'm going to do housework?
Oh my gosh.
Oh!
I did not plant that. Laura's comment. I did not tell you to say that.
No, you didn't.
Sweep. It's a sweeper. Elgin sweeper.
Oh my goodness. Excuse me, please. I am so sorry. I had some work to finish up, and I thought I had time to do this, finish up before I spoke to you. And I see I'm running a little behind schedule, so, I'm a mess. I didn't have time to clean up, but I was asked to talk to you about my life story. Some people think it's interesting. I don't believe it's all that interesting, but I did agree to talk to you about it, so. Excuse me, I apologize. My Elgin sweeper. My name is Anna Spani Schrader, and I was not born here in the United States. I was born in Switzerland, in the village of Ibach, Switzerland. I was born not far from Lake Lucerne, near the Swiss Alps. A beautiful place. I was born in 1888, lived in Ibach for most of my childhood. My father, now as you can see, this is not unusual. What I'm wearing, our family was not wealthy or prominent. My father was a carpenter, and he did build our home. It was a 3-story home, and we rented out the 1st and 2nd floor and lived in the 3rd floor. Now, we weren't wealthy. It was important that the whole family did its part, each member did his or her part to supplement the income for the family. I was able to go to school through 5th grade, but at the age of 13, I went to work in a cotton factory. I worked from 6:30 in the morning until 6:30 at night, which were, even for a young girl, were long hours. When work was slow at the factory, I worked in homes, house cleaning for some of the neighbors. So I was never able to have a lot of play time. I spent most of my time working, and Mother was a hard worker also. The problem with cleaning in those days was there was no running water in the homes. So any water we needed to clean would be brought in from the river and then had to be removed. And our laundry was done in the river, even in the wintertime. I recall Mother one time hanging up or taking clothes out of the river. It was in winter, and she had icicles on her hands. That's how cold it was. So it was not an easy life. And as a young girl, I had hopes of a better life. I had dreams. My father had friends who would come over, and they would at night talk. And these were men, of course, and they received letters often from friends that they had that were watchmakers that had moved from our village to a town called Elgin, Illinois, in America. Now these men said were encouraging anyone in the watchmaking business to come because the pay was good and it was a good life. Now, it sounded like a dream to me. Not that I was a watchmaker, but just to have a new home in a new place. My father said, no, absolutely not. You are too young. You cannot go. And he was not willing to leave the village. Well, there were 2 letters in my life that changed my life. One was a letter from a farmer in Dixon, Illinois, and he was a widower. His wife had died and he needed a housekeeper. He lived on a farm, and he had asked my father if I could come and work for him. And again, father said, no, absolutely not. I begged, I pleaded. Finally, and at this point I was 16 years old, finally, my brother, who was 21 years old, agreed to come with me, and the 2 of us traveled to this new land. Now, just imagine this. This little girl, 16 years old, still young, who had never been out of her village, who had never seen the ocean, who had never seen a ship, traveling from this small village across the ocean to an entirely new country in this strange town. Well, we first were in Dixon, right? And I did work for the farmer, but I realized it was a very lonely place. There were no friends there, no girlfriends, no social life. And I wondered if perhaps I'd made a mistake. Maybe I should not have done this. Then the second letter came that changed my life also. This was a letter from my friend Marie, who lived in Elgin. She worked at the National House. The National House was the boarding house for the Elgin National Watch Company. It boarded mostly young single women and men, and it was a beautiful building. And she said there was an opening for someone to work in the kitchen. She said, you should come. Well, of course I did. And I came and got the job. It was wonderful. I got $3 a week in pay. I had room and board, and I had friends around. I joined the Helvetia Society where I could be near other Swiss immigrants. We could speak in our native language and just share stories of our families. It was the perfect move for me. I was so excited. I married Adolf, who was a Swiss immigrant. We were blessed with 2 children. However, he died at a young age, which left me a single mother and a wager. Well, at that point then, I was able to take a job and move into the children's home, which was later called Larkin Home. And my children could live with me, and I worked there in the kitchen. I married a second time, Peter Schrader, and we were blessed with a child. He too died before I did. I believe I really had some strong genes and strong blood, maybe all that hard work, but I did outlive him also. I continued though to provide for my family. Unfortunately, I had 3 children, and the one son died at the age of 17. So the 2 girls and I managed to get along in Elgin. I did housekeeping, babysitting, I did whatever I needed to do to earn a living, and did so. I so enjoyed being with my Swiss friends. I also though joined Holy Trinity Lutheran Church, which is on Division Street, and made many friends there, and was a faithful member there. So it was a wonderful, wonderful life in spite of all the hard work. I suppose, and I died at just a few weeks shy of my 88th birthday. And I suppose the reason people think my story is interesting is perhaps the story of having a dream, going from one country to a totally new country, being willing to work hard, acclimating yourself, and making a life for yourself. People ask me, do you miss Switzerland? And I said, well, I did visit. I visited twice, but that's what it was. It was a visit. For my home was in Elgin, Illinois, in the United States of America, where my children, my husbands, and I lived and died and were buried here. Thank you for that story. I hope that you are not too depressed by the story, because I had a wonderful life, and I am very grateful to be here. Thank you. Okay, now I'm not the housekeeper anymore. This is kind of comfortable, so I'm going to keep it on. I just wanted to show you some things, some pictures of some of the women. There's Laura. Laura, that's a portrait that was done, and it hangs in the History Museum next to James, her husband. This is the 1935 version of the log cabin, and the centennial year this cabin was built. You can see it 1835. Of course, the real log cabin was torn down to make way for new streets and as Elgin grew. Okay, and this is the stone cottage, which still stands. It's 363 Prairie Avenue. Actually, the mansard roof and the addition was added by Orlando Davidson, by the son-in-law of James Gifford. So it was a smaller structure, but James, of course, the cobblestones reminded him of the East, but he liked the architecture, which he got the idea for the architecture from the South when he was in the Carolinas, and he enjoyed that. Okay. This is early Elgin. I love this photo. Take a good look, because not too many people get to see this one, I don't think. This is 1847, and this is looking east, and that's the first bridge. You see it? And then the dirt road, that's Chicago Street. Is that right, Liz? Right. Yeah, that's a cool. So that would have been around 1847, so that was when Laura and James were living there. Okay. This is Mrs. Lord, Mary Lord. Oftentimes when we hear about the history of the Lords, we give George a lot of credit, but Mary, Mary had her own income, and Mary had a lot of influence, I'm sure, in terms of how to donate money to, and they donated so much to the city of Elgin. Okay, here's the beloved pavilion. It was built in 1896-97, and then just a few months after it opened, there was a fire, and it had to be rebuilt. It was rebuilt then in 1898, so when George spoke, that would have been at the 1898 pavilion. So it was only a few months before they had to rebuild it. Next one. There's the bandstand. What a lovely place. Can't you just imagine? I can see it like a painting. I can see the women dressed strolling through the park and looking at the bear. I understand there also was a snake pit. Yeah. A lot of you have been there. Yeah. I can easily skip that. I didn't have a picture of the snake pit. Okay. And this is the wonderful Natural History Museum. It was built, as I said, in memory of Mary. George built it for her, but he didn't finish it. It wasn't completed. The west wing was added, this wing was added in 1907. So the main building was built 1906. Correct me if I'm wrong, Sherry. And then the wing was built in 1907, and it took 100 years then before the east wing was finally added. So we now have a beautifully symmetrical building, which never got finished. George died before they really could continue the building, and nobody picked up on the concept of finishing it, so it took 100 years. Birdie, here's Birdie. This is a picture of her all dressed up as a young woman. She did a lot of things, and here she is modeling. Ludlow Shoes was a shoe company in Elgin, so here she is. She's pretty young here, I think. And this is my very favorite picture. This would be the 1910s era. And here she is in dungarees. And I'm not sure what that is in her hand. At first I thought it was a oil can, but I'm not sure, but it's some kind of mechanical tool. And she just, you know, took time to have her picture taken, and then I'm sure she's back in working on her car. All right, you asked about the women. This is really a cool picture. This was the picture of the Haynes automobile in 1908, and it's Ida Dangerfield. I'm not sure who's who, but except Birdie. Ida Dangerfield, Elizabeth Forrest, and Elizabeth Hunt. So this was taken along the trip. Okay. And Anna. I tried to find a picture of Anna. I contacted Mary Cook from Holy Trinity Lutheran Church. Bless her heart, she works in the archives, and I said, because I knew she had been a member there, and she died in 1976, so we could have had a picture. And she looked in directories, and they didn't have pictures even in 76 yet in the directories, and couldn't find a picture that would have labeled her as such. But I'm sure she's in that archive somewhere, but couldn't find her. Okay, this is the National House. This is a beautiful structure in the gymnasium that was added later. Okay, I'm trying to think there. See the trolley car on that? That was probably the 1890s. Here's the dining room, the National House dining room. I love this picture too. At the turn of the century, the height of the occupancy, they could provide 1,500 meals daily. And Anna worked in the kitchen, so I'm sure they appreciated. Now she came a little bit later, but it was a pretty large operation there. Okay. And Holy Trinity, which still stands. It's on Division Street. That's where she was a member, a faithful member. Now, just a little addition, and you're being very kind to allow me to keep this conversation going here, but I had a phone conversation. What happens is people contact you and say, I know someone, right? I have a relative, or I know someone. Well, I got an email from Mark Scharf, and his sister is Susan Scharf Johnson. I don't know if you know that name at all, but they lived in Elgin, and he knew Anna. He called her Annie. Annie babysat for them on a regular basis. And he could not say enough about good things about her. Said she was such a kind, positive person, as hard of the worker and as difficult as her life was, she was very positive. She taught herself to read through the Elgin Courier News. She of course learned English. She loved to bake, so every time she would babysit, she would bring a pastry or bread or something with her. And she loved to knit. And when she worked at the Larkin home, she would knit mittens, and she knitted over 100 mittens a year for the children. So she was a very generous, and you think about how little she had and how generous she was. She's a perfect example of giving to others, giving to your community. So that was a fun conversation. Happy birthday. We could sing, but I'm sure we'll be watching. I purposely did not speak about the library directors, because they are going to be featured at our 37th annual cemetery walk this September, 21st and 22nd. And if I told you their story now, you would, you could probably stand and tell the story at the walk. We don't want to do that. But these were two of the library directors, and wonderful stories, Cecil Harvey and Catherine Louise Abbott. And they are two that will be featured, and you will hear their role in the library over the years. Okay.
Linda, thank you.
Oh, you're
You
welcome.
guys, thank you for all this. And we promised surprise guests, so. I first should let you know that Catherine Abbott served as the director of Gail Borden Public Library from 1903 to 1943, the longest reign of any library director so far, although Carol, you're working on it. So tonight, we have here in our audience, Catherine's great-grand nieces, Kathy Abbott from Chicago, and her sister Ann Hayner from Madison. So welcome to both of them.
Well, we're just both pleased to be here, and this is all serendipitous, and we're looking forward to the cemetery walk.
All right. Thank you, Kathy. And as you know, we are celebrating our 150th anniversary here at the library, and we have a big birthday party coming up to which you are all invited. It's coming up very soon. It's Tuesday, March 19th, starting at 4 p.m. in the main lobby. So,
Why that date?
because that is the date that the library was formed.
Oh, no,
No,
open to the public.
open to the public. Okay, sorry. For the first time, it's on March 19th, 1874.
At 7 p.m.
Oh, that's when it officially opened, okay.
But our party's earlier.
Yeah, 4 p.m. is our party, so hope to see you all there.
And I don't know if you saw the exhibit downstairs, but that's wonderful. Celebrating Women's History Month, but it has pictures of the library directors, and you must stop and see that too. Well done.
Yes. And I want to leave with a quote, which I found from author Kate Hodges, and it is, "Behind every great woman is another great woman."
Oh,
Do you have any questions or comments for Linda?
Just unrelated, are they gonna leave the lights around the library after the celebration?
No.
Here's our CEO, Carol Mellon.
Well, I had wanted the lights to be up all year. This was special, actually, our foundation, the Gail Borden Public Library Foundation, did pay for that. Unfortunately, are they down yet?
Yes.
Yeah, they took them down, yeah. They are lights that cannot withstand heat. So as the temperature rises, those lights would not, I don't know, we didn't hear what would happen to them. Do they pop, or do they just don't work, or what? So they had to come, they took them down in February, and but maybe we'll get them up early in the fall again. I think they said we could put them up in October, but
All right.
we just have to get the foundation to fund it.
Yes.
Is the library that was built 150 years ago the one that's still there by the park?
No. The first location for the library was on the 3rd floor of the Holman, I believe, home bank, and that was a building that was where the current tower is now, the tower building. And so that other building was demolished, and the tower building was built, I believe, in the 1920s. Yeah. So, and then the library moved to another location as it grew. And then it was in about Melissa knows the history. She's read everything about it, Melissa Burnett. What did you say about the Schofield Mansion?
Sure. When the library left from the first location in the home bank building, they moved to another location and then moved to 50 Spring Street. And that's what you still see standing over here. It was originally the Schofield Mansion and did not have the wings on the side of the building. We only have one picture that I'm aware of, unfortunately from the back view of it, before the wings were added, and that happened much later. So they were in there from 1894, and that was a gift from the Church Brothers to the library. The library had discussed purchasing that and moving in there, but then decided against it, and then, right after that, the Church Brothers, one of whom was on the board at the time, donated the Schofield Mansion, and then we moved in there in 1894. Yep, so our name then is from the Church Brothers' stepfather, Gail Borden. So, not a woman. So their stepfather, he never lived in Elgin, but you do know his name from condensed milk and other inventions. He worked a lot in the dairy industry, and in fact, this was a dairy hub for the country. Yeah, for the world, yeah. We set the prices here, we set the stick of butter shape that you know today in our stores in this area of the country is the Elgin stick.
And his wife, his second wife, was
Second
Emmeline Borden, and she's the one that lived in the Fox Valley and convinced him, at least that's the story
Yes.
I know, convinced him to come from the east to start, right, to open
Yes.
a.
1968.
Right. We were in the Spring Street building, and they added on a couple times. That's where they had electric lights installed for the first time. They switched from coal heat. Originally they were heating it with coal, and we stayed in there. And then in 1968 we moved across town to what now is, it's green space right across Kimball Street now, to 200 Grove. And then in 2003, we moved in here, so we've been in here just over 20 years.
That mansion is the prettiest brick building I've ever seen.
It is, isn't it beautiful? Yes.
I cannot explain what it is about it or
Yes.
why, but it's just the most attractive brick I've seen anywhere.
It's from worldwide known, which we talked about, the Bedford limestone. It actually was some of what that was built from. Bedford limestone is known from around the world for building. So that was imported to Elgin to help build the Schofield Mansion, but it was converted from a residence to a public building, and that took some doing.
Awesome. And that's where Catherine Abbott was doing.
Yes, and that's where Catherine Abbott was director.
Yes.
Yeah,
Wow.
Ackman's
Yes.
department store, so I'm betting a bunch of you Elginites remember that name, so Ackman's was there. We do have some really wonderful photos around Spring Street, and the evolution of this library while we were at Spring Street was incredible, because it did start with dirt roads and ended up paved with brick. There was no sidewalks originally. One of the streets on the side was actually called Milwaukee. It was renamed. So there's a huge evolution, and Elgin grew amazingly during that time. So it was a really special time when we were in Spring Street, and then incredible growth since then. And here we are.
Right. Happy birthday, Gail Borden. Linda, come take another bow.
Oh, take a bow.
Take a bow
With
again.
Melissa.
With Melissa. With.
Take a bow together.
All right. Thank you all for coming. Have a nice evening.
Shockingly, almost immediately. And I know